Hi, Corrine Maury, Area E. I want to talk politics today. Now, I'm sure that's going to raise some kind of emotional response, but there are some things that we have to talk about. So, I'm going to talk about the local government level today, but I do want you to know that there are three levels of government in Canada. The federal level, which are things that impact all of Canada. So we're talking the National Defence, we're talking EI, the Supreme Court. Then we have the provincial level, which is where your social system resources are distributed. So that's like education and healthcare and highways. And then you have at the local government level, which is administered under the regional district umbrella. They are mandated to take care of things like waste management and emergency services. They take care of the local planning that contributes to how your home environment looks. And so it is this last level that I want to talk about today. Now, politics is actually the process of which groups of people that are living together make decisions. It's how we determine how we want to create resources and distribute them. And under this jurisdiction, we use a process of government that has an elected board. So there are, in our case, in the regional district, there are 20 elected board directors who represent each area. And then there is the RDCK staff who carry out the instructions that the board gives. Now, it's worth noting that when a board director takes office, they do swear an oath of allegiance to the residents, not to the government, to the residents. So their job is to ensure that your resources are being spent wisely and efficiently. Those resources are collected through property taxes. And just a majority of the funds of your property taxes go to local government. The local government does collect and remit to the provincial government money for hospitals and school districts that are part of the payment that you make with the property tax. But a majority of the money does go to the regional district. If you haven't already received a pamphlet in the mail, you will be getting one. And this pamphlet was compiled by community members who have been networking for the last couple of years, all the way from Creston to Argenta, Burton to Samo. These are individuals within your community that are starting to pay attention to what is going on in government. We have been attending board meetings. We have been analyzing the financial statements. We've been looking at the operations management of what is going on in the RDCK. And we created just a little blurb of things that we have discovered in terms of what is happening down at our local government level. One thing I'll highlight is, for instance, in 2017, taxes collected were about $26 million. 5 years later, 2022, that had increased to $36 million as a result of increased assessments and development. But again, this year, our taxes still increased another 6 to 10%, depending what area you were in, as well as increased user costs for recreation facilities and transfer stations. So we have significant concerns that it doesn't matter how much money they are collecting from us, they still can't seem to manage to provide services in a way that is showing a fair representation of what we are spending. So we are just trying to work alongside with the board of directors. Many of them, I think there's 11 that are new to the board that just came on a year ago. And they're under significant pressure because there is a lot of downloading of responsibility from the provincial government to the local level. This is a problem because this is called jurisdiction creep. Every level has responsibilities that we are paying taxes for to that level to take care of those services. And in this case, the province, even though they're collecting their taxes to provide the services, is downloading some of this stuff onto the local government, which they are agreeing to, which is kind of a problem. And then our local taxation has to go up to, again, have somebody take care of these services. Okay, so there are some significant things that are occurring both locally and provincially that are going to impact our home communities. And I think it's important that we are aware of this, because if you want a group to be able to successfully participate in the creation of their home environment, this means, one, they need to be informed of components that contribute to the decisions. They need to be able to participate in that decision making, and they need to actually be empowered to enforce the things that they decide on. And we are currently in a state where this is being compromised. And this whole concept of democracy, I think we need a reminder that this is a living, breathing organism that needs sustenance in order to survive. And there is indications showing us that democracy is currently probably on life support. And so this is why we are reaching out to our community, because we want you to know that we're seeing signals that are going to create significant impacts on how we live. First thing I want to bring up is we noted that as we were going through all of the operational management of the regional district over the last year, we discovered that a lot of the decisions that were occurring, there was no recording of how the directors were voting. Now, this is something that MPs and MLAs all have to record their votes, because it's a process of accountability, that if you elect somebody to represent you, you need to see how they are voting. And if the only way you can see that is if you happen to be in the meeting, that isn't transparent. So we actually brought a resolution to the board in September that we were asking that all votes be recorded so that we can ensure that our director is actually representing us. This resolution was actually opposed. The directors, there was only 4 that were in favor of the transparency. And yet there was all sorts of incredible reasons why these directors felt that they shouldn't have to be responsible for their decisions. This is concerning. And the famous comment was from Keith Page, who was like, well, why can't we just have the value of transparency and not have to implement any mechanism for it? So this is why we have distrust in political representatives, because we are looking for somebody that we can trust, and that means you have to be transparent about what you're doing. So I'm going to ask that if you feel this is important to you, that you know how your directors are voting, that you inform your director that you expect that to be something that is changed quickly. Okay, second thing. Okay, now these next 2 issues that I'm going to bring up actually have some considerable overlap with things that are going on in the province. They're big issues, and I'm going to do my best to simplify this, but give me a break. Right now, every area in the regional district has had the option of creating what's called an official community plan, an OCP for short. This OCP is where your community determines what you want to develop. So this affects your land use, which is housing, farmland, agriculture. It determines if you want parks. It is how you zone things, what regulations and bylaws you want to enforce in your community. So everyone gets to decide what goes on in your community if you want to do that. Some areas have chosen not to. They don't want to have zoning and bylaws. What we had introduced last week from RDCK staff through the Rules Affairs Committee is that they're finding it too much work to have to enforce bylaws and regulations for each individual OCP. And they have proposed that all of these individual OCPs are collapsed and harmonized into one regional official community plan. Now, this is interesting because at the same time, in the province, in the BC Provincial Legislature right now, there is a bill moving forward called, and I'm going to read some of this stuff, residential development. And so David Eby has been escalating that we have this housing crisis which probably is due to the fact that they are pushing immigration, of which they don't have housing for. And so now they are changing the development rules for the intent of transferring control of municipal planning over to the province. And they're going to do this through that tool of the regional OCP. So what they're doing is they are creating regulations that all development now has to be multi-units. They're pushing dense housing, and they are regulating that you don't need any public hearings now. All of this public housing or all of this development is actually going to start to eliminate the opportunity for development of single family housing now. So your house with a yard concept is going to be eliminated because they are forcing this regulation through that all development has to be multi-units. But at the same time, they're not contributing anything to the infrastructure involved. And the RDCK has admitted that there is no real grants available. It's not easily accessible. And so the responsibility of all related infrastructure is going to fall on each municipality. So you have this construct where the province is moving in and taking control over how housing and development is going to occur in your community, but you're left with the cost of it. And I know that for all of us who live in the Nelson area, we're already aware that there's lots of times when that sewage treatment plant overflows into the Kootenay River. We are not at a place where we have unrestricted water use, that we have the capacity to continue to keep this uncontrolled housing development, especially when the government is going to control the regulations around it and we have lost our say. This is massively important. One of the amendments is, I'll just read it to you directly. So if the Lieutenant Governor and Council makes regulations respecting the siting, the size, dimension, location, type of housing unit required, a local government must exercise the powers under the related section in accordance with those regulations. So the provincial government is telling the municipal level that they have to do what they're told. And part of the tension we're having with the board of directors is that they are feeling that they have to do what they're told. Where for some of us, we've actually experienced that sometimes you can just say no. Just saying. I'm one of them. We also have the issue where the provincial government now has started regulating short-term rentals in municipalities of over 10,000 people. So it's interesting that you can work like crazy and buy a property and pay the payments on it, and then the government can come in and tell you what you're allowed to do with your property. Now, I want everyone to know in the region that the RDCK has stated that even though this affects municipalities now, by 2024, the regional districts do have the option to opt into this regulation. So, and that is, it appears that that is their intent, that they will now implement those same rules for short-term rentals into the regional district areas, not just the municipalities. You should be aware of that. What we're running into is that local participation in decision-making is being removed. What happens to us is now becoming under the control of the provincial government. I am going to move into the second thing, which is currently, you'll have seen in the newspaper, both here in Nelson and the Castlegar News, that the Nelson and Area Economic Development Partnership with the City of Nelson and the RDCK are commissioning reports proposing to get involved in housing. Now again, housing is not local government's responsibility. And in fact, If you talk to anyone who's tried to get a building permit in the last few years, you'll understand that whole department is hardly coping. If you go through the quarterly reports of the regional district, you will start to read through all the projects that they were working on. And over again, they say, we haven't been able to service this project because we have a lack of staff, which is interesting to me since they have so many of them. However, what we do have in this community in Nelson is we have 2 nonprofit organizations who have successfully worked with the province to create affordable housing. So why is government trying to get their hands into something they, 1, have no business being involved in, 2, they don't have the resources to manage, and 3, they should not be competing with nonprofits to provide this service? So, regional district, back off. Okay. Okay. There's one more thing. We have right now getting pushed through legislature another fantastic act. Now, if you remember last November, the NDP government shoved through the Healthcare Professions Act, which has had massive implications on imposing government appointees to regulate healthcare professionals and to overstep their authority in getting involved in your relationship with your medical provider. There's been a huge backlash in the healthcare professions sector, and there's a lot of anger over the fact that the government continues to try to take over the regulation of things it doesn't have the skill level to do. Each college, so doctors, nurses, dentists, were electing their own representatives to contribute to how they practice. And now our provincial government has decided that they're going to eradicate all of those elected officials and appoint their own directors, of whom they don't even have to be somebody in that profession. We are going into a free fall here. Okay, now here we are a year later, and there's something called Bill 31, the Emergency and Disaster Management Act. Now, the reason why this is important at a local level is because, the provincial government comes up with all this legislation and regulations, but it has to be enforced at the municipal level. And this is where we are paying for this. I need you to be aware of what is coming through. So I'm just going to actually just read this, okay? What we have is the emergency definition used to be that it was an event that had occurred, is ongoing, or appears imminent as being caused by accident, fire, explosion, technical failure, rioting, security threat, terrorist activity, force of nature, and a prescribed type of incident. What does that mean? And now includes pandemics and climate change. So the presence or the suspected presence or the imminent spread of a transmissible disease or environmental toxin. It could be the prescribed type of event, which we don't know what that is. And it requires the prompt coordination of action or special regulation of persons and property. So some of the actions that they're implementing, Section 76. The minister may order that they can appropriate the use or control the use of any private property. They can authorize entry or prohibit entry without warrant into any structure or land for the purposes of emergency measures by any person they designate. They can authorize alteration, removal, and demolition of trees, crops, and structures. The Section 78, the minister may order, control, or prohibit travel to and from an area, carrying on of a business or an event, and require a person to stop doing an activity even if the person is licensed, permitted, and authorized to do so. Section 82, the Lieutenant Governor in Council can take retroactive orders legalizing actions that would have been previously illegal. Section 154. Immunity for public service who implements these orders and gives them protection against legal proceedings. In 2019, BC introduced legislation that mandates governments bring provincial laws into alignment with the UN Declaration of Rights. They used one tool, was the Sendai framework, which states that the purpose of this legislation is to prevent the risk of emergencies. How do you do that? How do you prevent the risk? What we have now is there is a RDCK staff member, Dan Seguin, who was assigned the task of creating a report to respond to this legislation because the province asked for feedback from all the different parties that are involved. And we asked for a copy of his report because we want to see what the municipal government is saying in response to this new level of control that the government is giving themselves. We haven't had access to this report, but it is important that we understand that the local government is responsible to give responsible feedback about the things that are being planned for us. Your directors are your direct link to local government, and local government is what holds in check provincial government. And we need people to be communicating with your directors what is important to you, what you want your community to look like, and to support them in making sure that our interests are represented. We have created a loose group called Kootenai Tribe. You can join our email list if you are interested in getting updates on what we're doing and what is going on. Our website is www.kootenaitribe.ca and our email is kootenaitribe@proton.me. We would like you to know what's going on. We are doing our best to make sure that you have the information you need to make sure that you're empowered to participate in the decision-making that is going on in your home. So, thanks for listening to me. That's the latest, and we'll talk to you soon.